Well, welcome back to another session. I hope you are well, and I hope you're pleasantly enjoying the lovely summer that we have been blessed with over the past month. I'm going to pick up from a conversation that I started um, 2 sessions ago, in which I was focused on something that I consider to be an important conversation amongst men. And that conversation has to do with the challenge to succeed. The challenge to succeed is not purely economical, it also expands to its relationships. In the first session, I gave an outline of that challenge. In the second session, I expanded on what I consider to be a more profound focus, not a profound session, just a profound focus, partly because of where we are in the West. First world problems. There is a saying that hard men create soft times, and soft times create weak men. And we've created a series of weak men in the West, primarily and firstly as a result of solving the problems we had about survival, safety, protection. We have abundance in the West, and so we've created a lot of very weak men. And I started to cover a topic relating to the word beta, the whole conversation about beta males and how to recognize or identify whether that software installation is operating on your hardware as a man, but also to help women understand whether their significant other is running on a software that over time will lead to them finding their significant other unattractive. It will repel you. It might be fine in the early stages and during early days of the relationship, but as time progresses, it always leads to separation for a number of reasons. Any woman worth her salt wants to contend with a significant other who is strong, decisive, assertive, intelligent, focused, has a vision, has a plan, rather than another boy that she has to look after, especially when she then has children. So in today's session, the third, what I want to do is go through what I consider to be some traits, characteristics, or observations that will help you understand how to spot the beta in you if you are a man, and how to spot the beta in him if you are his significant other. I made a list of about 15 items. Now, this list is not completely exclusive as a guideline and discount other potential traits or observations. This is a conversation that I had with myself, and I made a list of some items. The list is not complete. I will continue to work on the list, and I'll modify some of the items that I have identified. But for today, in the few minutes I have with you, I'm going to go through the list. I will not expand on the items. I try my best to stick to just bullet points. And at the end, I'll talk about how to fix it, giving you bullet points again. My intention will be to do a session where I cover or I separate these items into chunks so I can expand on each item by explaining why I chose them, how they affect you as a man, and what to do about it. Now, let me begin by saying as follows. Remember, these are beta traits that you can spot, ways to spot whether you have beta traits in you as a man, or ways through which you as a woman can spot whether there are beta traits in the man or men around you. I'll start by saying something. Recognize, and I have to make it very clear, this is not a pejorative conversation. I'm not looking down. I believe that I don't think that I am superior to anyone. I don't believe, and I don't think that I'm inferior to anyone. Both superiority and inferiority opposite sides of a counterfeit coin. In using this beta reference, I'm not suggesting that these are bad people or bad men. I'm just simply pointing out something that we as a society have to recognize. That when you have a population where 80% of the men are running on a beta software and 20% of the men are running on what should be a traditional or what should be a complete software, we have a problem. In places outside of the West, you would find some of the things I'm going to reference do not carry as much weight. Why? Because in most places outside of the West, they haven't solved the issue about survival, provision, protection to the same degree that we have in the West. So we've created weak men. Since the 1960s, we have seen fathers not being present, and when fathers are present, to be very passive, and where present, to also be very feminine. So we raised a generation of harder women and softer boys. And so what we have is an inverted arrangement where boys have no sense of purpose, no meaning. So in relationships, they have a challenge to succeed because they were not prepared and they were not given the frame, the masculine frame, the shoulders required to carry the burden of performance. Beta is a software, not a hardware issue. Let's start with that first. Think about a computer system. You have a software, you have a hardware. The software actually is what creates the experience. The hardware is what effectively is the housing. It would be the same in relationships, the same. A woman with a very poor attitude, despite being gorgeous, pretty, beautiful or gorgeous, you might not want to be around her for more than the opportunity for ejaculation or fun. Why? Because a woman's attitude can be so vile that it doesn't make up, or rather, despite her beauty, her attitude negates all of the beauty that she has. Similarly, your hardware is masculine as a man, I hope anyway, but your software could be beta, and therefore it is a software issue. Now that simply means all you have to do is find and get the appropriate upgrade, and the system should function as it is supposed to. Imagine running, I think I'm running on Windows 12. I think so. I hope so. I think there is a way for me to check, but I believe I am running, my computer is Windows 12. Imagine if I was still running on Windows 5. Things will not work properly. Same computer, different software, different performance, different frustrations. So beta is a software, not a hardware issue. It's not an intellectual issue. There are men who are incredibly brilliant, geniuses, intelligent, hardworking, but still run on the software from a relational aspect and are built on a feminine rather than a masculine archetype. I should also make it clear, as I said, it's not a software issue. It is a software, not a hardware issue. It's not an intellectual issue. This is purely an emotional and a relational issue. Now, beta has a very, very little correlation with what I consider to be a man's value. I did a session. It might be worth going back, and if you haven't seen that session already, take a look at the session I did about how to assess a man's value. And I produced that primarily for women, to give women an opportunity to understand how to assess a man's value. I went through about 9 items, I think. A man's, perhaps in chronological order or not, manhood value. And that's to do with whether a man was actually raised, trained to be a man. Because most men are not. Most men have been raised by women and absent fathers. So most men do not have the preparation required for what life offers. Manhood value, character value, husband value, economic intrinsic value, sexual marketplace value, non-sexual marketplace value, gentleman's value. And I went through all of these items. you can find a man who scores very high in sexual marketplace value, in reproductive fertility value, in economic intrinsic value, in gentleman's value. You can find a man who scores high in non-sexual marketplace value, a man who scores high in character value, a man who scores high in even husband value. But beta has nothing to do with all of that, because you can have all of that at the highest level and still be a beta male, or have a software installation that is beta. Why? Because it has everything to do with your manhood value. Whether you were raised to be a man, and whether you were raised by a father who taught you how to be a man, or whether you were raised in an environment where you saw manhood, masculinity modeled, admired, praised, nourished, loved, most importantly, honored. If you had none of that, and therefore never were prepared, you would have a manhood value that is very low. And therefore you'll be running on a software installation that is feminine. So keep that in mind. In the session I did some weeks ago, and I've covered this over many years, but I did a refresher session some weeks ago. I talked about the importance of understanding you're born a male, you transition into boyhood, but that occurs based on preparation, awareness, understanding, training, learning, and hard work. You transition from boyhood to manhood through work. You transition from manhood to being a gentleman by being crafted. So the first two stages of a man's journey, from being a male, boyhood, manhood. Most boys remain boys, they don't move to manhood. And what you find is they transition from boyhood into being adult males, but they still have a boy software. So work, time, resources, investment, study, discipline, practice, having a model that you can follow, having a mentor that you can learn from, helps you prepare and transition through the stages in the right manner. So you go from being a boy to being a man to being a gentleman. The last part is crafted. Most men who have a beta software stay stuck along that journey. Now here is what's fascinating. You can find a man who is a gentleman, but is still beta, which is why I said that it has nothing to do with your economic intrinsic value, your non-sexual marketplace value. It has nothing to do with your gentleman's value, nothing to do with your character value, has nothing to do with whether you have the ability to reproduce reproductive fertility value, non-sexual marketplace value, but it has everything to do with manhood. So you can start from male, move to boyhood, and then jump manhood and arrive at being a gentleman. This is why you can see a lot of men who, I'll use the Brits, so it doesn't evoke any emotional response. You can see Brits who are beta males, but extremely gentlemanlike in their mannerisms. Why? Because they were trained to be gentlemen. That is simply a training for being a gentleman. You were raised in a certain way. You were probably raised to pedestalize women from a relational perspective. But you were not developed into a man. So you were crafted into being a gentleman because that just requires training. But you were not developed and made into a man. So you went from boyhood to gentleman with the wrong software. And let me go through these 15 items, and I'll breeze through these items very quickly. As I said, I won't go into the details. Let me give you an example, I guess, to set things, set a context. I'm familiar with someone. I'll change the names around so there isn't any emotional responses. I am familiar with 3 boys, young boys. at the cusp of becoming adult males. Raised by their mother, have a father. He is present, very soft. These boys are homeschooled. They have no interaction, or very little interaction with other boys. And as I study these boys and I observe, I'm aware of the fact that, I hate to say this, but it would take the grace of God and extreme hard work for those boys not to develop into being extremely high beta males. Why? A very feminine father, not involved as much as he should. So much so that these young boys cannot look you in the eyes. Listen, they've been feminized so much that once they leave home and get into the big bad world, they're going to be eaten up by women. Anyway, the 15 ways, traits, observations, and how to spot if you have the beta in you. Number 1. Now, keep in mind I'm referring to something specifically to do with relationships. Intersexual dynamics. Key. Let me preface the 15 items, because I think this is important. I talk about 2 separate markets. And it's a crude way of talking about relationships, but it's a simple analogy that people understand. You have buyers and sellers. Whenever you have both buyers and sellers coming together and you have equal exchange or fair exchange, a transaction takes place. There are 2 marketplaces with relationships: dating and what I call relationships or marriage. Marriage being the focal point. You have variations to that, or derivatives of that: civil partnerships or cohabitation. I don't consider long-term dating or the whole term partnership to be a relationship. You're either dating and therefore unmarried, or you're married, or whatever the derivative might be. A man and a woman appear in each of those markets. In the dating marketplace, the leverage of power, the balance of power rests on the woman's side, all things remaining equal. Why? A woman is a gatekeeper to her body, her womb, and her emotions. So she decides when intimacy begins and affection exchange starts, and most importantly, her body, her choice. She gets to choose. She decides who she gives herself to and who she allows to bring to the world his seed by reproduction. So a woman actually controls. She's a gatekeeper. So in the dating marketplace, the woman calls the shots, which is why men, we play the dance, because what we're looking for in the dating marketplace, I should have said also, the dating marketplace is short term. The marriage marketplace, relationship marketplace is more medium to long term, ideally long term. That's that. At least that is the aspiration at the start. Men play a dance, and the dance is so that we are chosen or selected for sex. Dating for men is the same as synonymous with sex, because that's what we date for. This is a crude thing for women to accept. Some women believe that men date because we want to get to know you, because we want to be friends with you, because we think your ideas are superior to other men. The only motivation that men have is sex. Ejaculation is so powerful. When combined with the testosterone we have, the need to ejaculate is so powerful that men will lie, steal, and do anything they can to ejaculate. In the relationship marketplace, men are the gatekeepers. We decide who we go on one knees, both knees or no knees, and who we choose as our spouse for the long term. We decide who we give that vision that we have to share that vision with. A woman pays a heavier penalty in the first marketplace if she chooses wrongly. She pays a heavier penalty for reproduction, especially for the wrong person. A man pays a heavier penalty for choosing the wrong spouse. Why? He loses half his assets. 9 out of 10 times, The family courts will favour the mother, so he loses most of his kids if he is married and has kids. He loses his home. In the UK, 7 out of 10 times the woman leaves or files for divorce or separation. In the remaining 3 out of 10, she forces him to make that choice. So in 8.5 out of 10 times, the woman is the one leaving. And most relationships have a duration of roughly between 5 and 7 years. Half of the marriages in the UK end in divorce. And 8.5 out of 10 times, the woman is the one leaving. So the man carries a heavier liability if he chooses to go into a significant relationship with a woman. The civil partnership and cohabitation were derivatives by the family courts to give the woman power. Before, you had to be married in order for you to have a claim on the man's assets. These days, once you've lived together for long enough, there is a liability. So men are gatekeepers in relationships. Now here's the key thing when I refer to beta in relationships. In the first marketplace, which is dating, a man will pursue. A man who knows his value does not pursue beyond a certain timeline. So for example, a man who knows his value will not take you on 3 dates or more without knowing that he will get something back in return. In the relationship marketplace, this is where I start to judge the beta heavily. Why? Because the man has the power. In the first, he doesn't have the power, so he has to play the dance. Sometimes men will play the dance in order to get to the finish line, which is ejaculation. In the second marketplace, the presupposition is that sex has taken place already, because you start with what I consider to be stages. Introduction, conversation and communication, some form of intimacy, affection, sex, then relationships begin. Dedication, commitment, marriage. So in the second marketplace, for a relationship to be gifted, the initial part, all things remaining equal, which is sex, intimacy, has already happened. So a man performing in the second marketplace, which is marriage, in a manner that is consistent with how he would perform in the first marketplace means that he doesn't understand the value of who he is. He hasn't come into his manhood. So keep those concepts in mind. The marketplace, the balance of power, and who holds the leverage. The 15 items. Number 1, a man who pursues you for more than a month, intensively. And recognizing a month, I'm assuming 1 day per week. So 4 dates. A man who pursues you, number 1, for more than a month intensively with no reciprocated investment in time, resources, affection, intimacy, or sex by the woman is, on a balance of probabilities, a statement I should have said at the start, on a balance of probabilities is running on a beta software. Now let me go back to the court system. On the court system, we have something called the balance of probabilities. Now, I want you to remember what I call the 3P test. Possible, plausible, probable. I'm talking about probabilities, not possibilities, and not plausibilities. On a balance of probabilities, this 15 items, on a balance of probabilities, will identify the beta installation. Number 1, a man who pursues you for more than a month, or if you pursue a woman for more than a month, intensively, with no reciprocated investment in time, resources, affection, intimacy, or sex. You're running on beta. Number 2, a man who moves or is willing to relocate, leave his peers, leave his family, leave his nation, leave his country, and particularly, here's the key part, leave his garden, which is supposed to be nurturing, which is his place of work, a job, a career, profession, or some form of passion or purpose. You leave all that behind in pursuit of a woman. Beta. Now, I will expand on these later. So just take these initial items as they are. Number 3, a man who pedestalises a woman, and constantly a man who wears a feminine frame. So you're taking the position of where your, I guess your demeanor, your attitude is the feminine. Your software is the feminine. A man who shows no emotional stoicism, certainly a man who cries disproportionately at a rate higher than she does, you're running on beta. Now I'm going to give you an example very briefly. I've met a number of people over the past few months. One of them that stands out was at a wedding. And I don't think I've ever felt more cringy in my entire life. Why? When the bridegroom gave his speech, you would have thought it was a woman who wrote that. Yeah, he's talking about supporting her vision and everything about supporting her. And I thought, hang on, you're supposed to be the leader. The vision is yours. It's shared. It's managed by both of you. So you, effectively, she's your helpmeet. And your focus is the vision. Now, an important statement to make, and I should make it very clear, that it's important to understand that if you go, and perhaps I should say that this is number 4, a man who goes 50-50 or believes in a partnership rather than a leadership is running on beta software. Number 5, a man who agrees to double-barreled names as mandated by the woman, or chooses her last name, or agrees to a name swap, beta. Stay-at-home husbands or boyfriends, beta. Number 7, if you were raised and you were subscribed to the whole concept of gynocentrism, most likely, beta. Number 8, you're raised by a feminist mother and a feminine father, beta. Number 9, you're raised by a father who's absent and a mother who did everything, most likely, beta. You're raised as a boy minority in a family. In other words, more sisters or more feminine presence than masculine presence. Sometimes you may have been raised where there was equal numbers, but you had a passive father or an absent father. Probability, beta. Now, if you were not socialized, number 11, generally as a young man, the lack of being socialized can have an effect where you could be influenced in such a manner that you've missed out on the opportunity to play and be around other men, other boys. So if you want to socialize as a young boy, and if you find that you're regularly intimidated, you find an unease amongst other men, and particularly amongst men who are non-feminine, very likely beta, if you feel just generally intimidated for some reason. Number 12, if you did not get any form of roughhousing as a young boy, going into your adulthood, didn't join the Boy Scouts, didn't participate in group team activities or compete at a high level, didn't get involved in any form of martial arts, boxing, any form of group activity where you pair bonded with men and you did some roughhousing and rough and tumble play, and therefore you had the opportunity to learn and see, resist, push other men, and be pushed by other men, most likely beta. Number 13, if you prefer spending time with women than men, beta. If most of your friends are more women than men, you're on the beta software. Number 14, if you don't set or enforce boundaries, particularly boundaries related to your vision, most likely beta. If you don't provide an overarching vision in a relationship, you lack a sense of purpose, you offer no structure, no discipline, no plan, no mission statement in the union or for the union, beta. Number 15, as a default, here is a key statement I'm making. Number 15, as a default, if you are in the West and you're below 35, but most importantly below 30, the likelihood that you're running on a beta software is more on the balance of probabilities 80% than 20%. Now, I did a session where I explained, session 2, that in the West, we have this 80-20 split. Most boys who were raised in the last, most men, since the 60s in the UK, since 1960, 65, 80% of all men on the aggregate are running on the beta software. Outside the West, that number is more 20% than 80, and in some locations 10%. Now I'm giving you 15 items. Let me give you how you can fix this. I'll give you 6. Again, very bullet points as I bring today's session to a close. Number 1, how do you fix all this whole nonsense about having a beta software? And how do you get yourself back to completely cooked as a man? Number 1, accountability. You must have humility and you must accept. Number 2, identify the reasons in your personal life why things are the way they are. Strong mother, weak father, absent father, present father or passive, father raised without a strong father, therefore your grandfather being feminine, being weak, some form of abusive relationship. For whatever reason, identify the cause of why things are the way they are with you. Number 3, identify the ideal person you wish to become. Very important. Identify why you want to become that person. Second, very important. Number 3, identify when. Otherwise, it's simply an objective. A goal has to have a time frame. Number 4, identify the resources, time, and sacrifices that you would have to make to get you from where you are to where you want to get to. Number 5, create a plan. Get around masculine men or role models who have the qualities you seek. Find a coach. And number 6, get to work. Now, in the sessions that follow, I'm going to take what I've shared today as bullet points and break them into chunks so I can explain these concepts very carefully. See, let me leave you with something as I close. I'm not making a criticism at you as a man. Sometimes the software installation is put in us before we get to the age of reason, or before we develop our reasoning faculty to be able to think deductively or inductively. Like a sponge, we absorb everything the younger we are. Someone else may have been responsible for your life up until today. You don't have to live the same life you've lived over the past many years into the future. You can change. You can choose the life you want to lead. It all begins with recognizing where you stand. Now, I hope today's session has been useful.